Welcome. You're listening to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewett, in with Jim Riley.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jim. And listen, today is our the first anniversary of the Renegade River Show, and we're delighted to have our guest, Secretary of State Ruth Johnson, on the line with us. Welcome, Secretary.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be on your one-year anniversary, to be on your show.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about it. I got to tell you, it's been a real learning curve for me over the last year, and we've certainly had some high points and some low points, but with you on as our guest today, that's going to be one of the high points.
Well, thank you. I always look forward to making sure that we can get information out to people, and that way, when they make decisions, especially when they go to the polls, that they can vote for who they really think is going to do the job. And I thank you for getting out information about issues to the people so that they can make good decisions.
You know, mostly we have a lot of fun doing that. Tell me, if I could get you, Secretary, tell us a little bit about the FAIR program that you're working on.
Well, FAIR, our FAIR initiative, FAIR stands for Fighting Auto Insurance Ripoffs. And what we're trying to stop is fraud, and we've put together a task force to look at all the things that we can do. Some of them will probably be new laws, some of them will be how we do things internally, and some of them will be how we communicate with all the different branches of law enforcement. We knew it was a problem, some of the scams that are going on. There was an auto dealership that we closed down that was selling cars, used cars to people, and selling them insurance, and the insurance was all bogus. It was fraudulent, and of course, the only time you really find out is when you get in a accident and then there's a claim, and so people were being taken advantage of. We closed that one down. We found people out in our parking lot with a laptop and a printer printing off fraudulent insurance. People were buying it. Some of them, probably most of them, knew it was fraudulent. Some of them, you know, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. And you have to really guard yourself and be careful. But because we saw the fraud, we started electronic monitoring with the insurance companies, and we have an electronic verification system. And what we saw with that system was, it was really astounding, the amount of invalid and fraudulent insurance that people are driving without in Michigan. And again, some of them are taken advantage of, and some of them participate knowing that it's fraud. So we decided to do a one-day snapshot across this state, and we have 131 branches, and of course a couple of them in the UP are open just a day or two a week. So it was 128. 3 of them were closed that day. We did a snapshot of all the paper insurance that people brought in, not the electronic ones, but the paper ones. And it was a bit startling to see what the numbers were out there. Actually, 16.1% were fraudulent out of 3,400 paper certificates. That's 552 invalid or fraudulent. We saw whiteout. We saw... And one person that was cheating, they mistakenly used our own branch office fax number on their forged policy. We've seen advertised fake insurance on Craigslist. That guy's in a lot of trouble if he's convicted. He's been charged with a number of felonies. And nearly 30 people turned in fake insurance with an official-looking QR code on it that you use with a smartphone. And when you scanned it, it took you to a document that reads, "Llamas are so cool." But I'll tell you,
llamas
fraud certainly
cool.
is not. Yeah, we've even had, they've gotten so sophisticated, these people that sell bogus insurance, to some unsuspecting people, and some I would think probably know, but they have fake help desks that verify the phony insurance when our clerks call. We even have a former insurance agent that's using old forms, and again, they're tricking people. So we knew we need to do something, and we need to do it fast, because the cost to the honest people in this state is staggering, just staggering. We have a fund that we all pay into for uninsured and catastrophic funds, and it's a statewide fund to settle claims from accidents where someone does not have insurance. And the cost to us now annually is $220 million that's tacked onto all of our insurance. And that fund grew 47% between 2007 and 2011, just over 4 years, just because of the sheer number of claims stemming from these accidents involving uninsured motorists.
Ruth, I've got a question on this. It sounds like what you've explained so far has been the situations where the person who was presenting the the proof of insurance that was fraudulent was in many cases a victim, although some cases a willing a participant in the fraud. But I have seen, even here in Muskegon County, and I'm sure you, in your driving around, you may have seen somewhat similar, but there have been these storefront auto insurance companies that have been set up. I know there was one here in Muskegon County was called LA Insurance, I believe. And they had car insurance pay by the week. And pretty clearly, paying by the week is going to be effective for some folks who don't have a lot of money, going to pay a small amount. But it certainly opened the door for someone to get a policy, pay the small amount down, and then cancel it. Get the valid insurance form, the proof of insurance, and then cancel it shortly thereafter. Is your plan? I know you can't do everything at the same time, but will your endeavors be going after this truly, clearly fraudulent activity?
Well, it's legal to sell it by the week. We certainly have had discussions, and we've had one task force meeting about should we have insurance that you can only buy by the week, considering the number of people then that never pay past that. And by the way, they pay dearly for that week. But none of that money goes into the uninsured or catastrophic claims.
Correct.
So none of those people are paying if they quit paying on their insurance. So we're looking at ways that we'd have an electronic verification that would come in very often. We've already cut the time in half. We're looking at what we can do that's realistic with a computer system that we could get that information to law enforcement. And just by doing what we've done so far, we have increased the number that we have invalidated that are out on the road 10 times. We've gone from 431 that we suspended the vehicle registrations in 2011. So far this year, we're up over 4,300. So we're up 10 times higher than we've been. So we're taking a very active stance against people that are driving without insurance, because the rest of us are paying for that, and that cost at $220 million that we all have to pay to try to cover the people that are not insured through our insurance, which raises premiums, of course. That doesn't even begin to count or put into perspective the cost, because if you're driving a car and you get in an accident, under Michigan law, if the other person has 4 people in the car, you don't have to cover the driver, but your insurance has to cover everything with the people that are riding in the car with them. So those costs, of course, those medical costs are very high. So we're all paying those. We don't know the number on that, but we know that it's substantial. So the cost to Michiganians with our insurance premiums is just on the rise, and it's on the rise because of that. And I know that the legislature is always already looking at ways to try to find ways to cut auto insurance, because it's expensive, it's difficult for people, it's a lot of saving you have to do to drive a car, whether it's the maintenance, the gas, the tires, the oil changes, and especially insurance. But we're looking at how we make sure everybody pays their fair share. It's only fair that the rest of us aren't paying others' insurance.
Ruth, this seems to me to be a tremendous step forward, and I applaud you. Almost everything that you've said, actually everything that you've said, seems to me would be shared with virtually everyone in the state of Michigan. And yet, I'm hearing that there are some people that oppose you. It would seem to me it'd be a lay-down winner for everyone. What's up with the folks who think that Ruth's a nasty old lady doing harmful things to whomever?
Well, I think they probably don't have all the information, because this isn't just an urban problem. What we found, the fraud or invalid were in over half the counties in Michigan, and that was from the UP down to the south end and east and west. And it really isn't fair that the rest of us are paying the bill for people that are cheating, or for people that are selling bogus insurance that you, I, our grandparents, our parents, someone else might buy, and then they're left holding the financial bag, especially if there's any litigation. Just to fix their car can be terribly expensive if you've ever been in a car accident. It's amazing how much it costs to get a car fixed. in large part because they're so safe. So they, some of the parts fall away to protect the driver, which then is more costly to fix, but they certainly are much safer than they used to be. I remember when I was growing up, the seatbelt was my mom's arm about chest high when I sat in the front seat with her. We've come a long way since then, and I remember her getting under a 1949 Chevy that she bought for transportation because my dad worked, and he took the car, and she had 3 kids. You could see the road from the back seat, from right down through the floorboard. So she got under there with a drill and some bolts and nuts and put in a 2x6 floor in that old 1949 and kept a dipstick in it plugged in. It started up every time, but certainly the seatbelt was her arm coming across you. So now we have all that different safety stuff, and it costs a lot of money too, but it's well worth it in my opinion.
Ruth, just a handful of things occurred to me. First off, when we're talking about auto dealerships and their involvement in this, I spent well over 3 decades in the franchise automobile dealership business, so I've seen it, but I've never seen it on a franchise level. And I say it that way because typically Ford stores or GM stores, whether they be in places like Whitehall or Grand Rapids or Flint, those places typically, the franchise companies, in this case General Motors or Ford as examples, they're very scrutinizing about the backgrounds of the people that they give a franchise to, and along with that, typically those franchise holders have many millions of dollars in floor planning, etc., and so they're often very well funded. So it's kind of a surprise to hear that there are new car franchises involved in that. But
well, hold on, they're not new car franchises. We need to back up.
Okay.
It was an auto dealership that sold used cars.
Okay, so it was just what we refer to as a B lot.
Yes, a B lot.
Okay.
It was a used car lot. And, of course, a lot of people, I've only bought one new car in my life, but a lot of people that are buying used cars, financially for them, they're a little stretched when they go to a used car lot. They're not buying a new one when you can get 0 down and 0%. I can't think of anybody worse to take advantage of. Not that anyone should ever be, but they're counting their pennies and they're trying to save money so that they can do the right thing. And they purchased insurance through this used auto dealership, and the only way that they found out was by getting in an accident, and then they're left holding the bag with all the costs and then potential litigation too. So these are the kinds of people that really need to be put out of business day one rather than waiting longer. And better yet, and what this task force is going to do is put impediments for them ever to get a foothold or ever get started.
Very, very nice.
Just one person getting hurt by this is too many. So we'll be looking at ways to just absolutely, as I like to say, we're putting the brakes on an insurance fraud.
Listen, I really applaud that effort, but the other half of insurance fraud, if you will, goes on the actual property damage appraisal side. So an example of what I have seen is an appraiser will go into always an independent franchise or a non-franchise body shop, and they'll say it's some form of Chevrolet. They'll purposely make the vehicle in the pictures look worse than it is by doing things like loosening a front bumper or a rear bumper and then identifying it as frame damage so that the cost of the insurance, the actual insurance damage, is significantly higher. And then that appraiser and that body shop will literally split the extra money for work and parts that are never actually put on. And
boy, that's so distasteful because we all pay for that in our insurance premiums.
But it happens. It happens every day across America. I mean, I first witnessed this with a friend of mine. He's since passed away, but he himself was in the property damage appraisal business, and he was out in California. But it's every single day in every state, and it is almost as it's probably actually cost Michigan insureds more than even no-fault insurance does, which is a terrible piece of legislation to start with.
How do we get from your wonderful idea to having this become law? Can you wave a wand? Are you a czar? Or do we need both houses of the Michigan government?
She's not part of the Democrat Party. She's not a czar.
I wish I had a wand. There's so many things I'd like to do, but after almost a quarter century, and I guess that was the hardest thing for me to learn in the beginning, is when I found something that was so absolutely wrong. And when I ran for county commissioner, I thought I'd get in there and make all these changes. And when I brought up some serious problems, or we had one service that was being done by 5 different groups and being redundant, I thought everybody would say yay and vote for it. But there's a way you go about it, and of course that's one of the things that I learned from that, and have taken that with me, and have been I've gotten a lot done because of, first, I think, looking at things that really hurt the electorate, and secondly, trying to fix them and trying to work with others. And this will require that. We have the task force that has met, and we're looking at different ways to do it. It's going to really take all of us to work together to tackle this program. So we're looking at better communication, we're looking at better technologies, new procedures, and new legislation. And we've already, I've gone with my staff, and we've met with the leadership in both the House and Senate. We've showed them what we've got. They applaud the efforts and would like to support making sure that we have a fair system that works for everybody. So I think that we will be able to work it through, and we will be able to fix these problems. It just will take everybody carrying their load, and of course there's always an expense, but I have found that in government that for every nickel you put towards resolving and stopping fraud, you get a quarter back. There is a payoff on it, and then of course this one, we already know the numbers are very high, and when you're looking at 16.1% from the UP down and east and west, then you know that you have a serious problem that's worth right now trying to find some resources to be able to put together whatever that we have to do. Most of it should be able to be done through technology and law enforcement and cross-communication, but it may require one additional person in our office to be able to head this up.
I got to tell you, Secretary, I think you're on the right path. We need to go to a break. Please stay with us, because I've got a whole bunch more questions between Jim and I for you. And folks, we'll be right back.
Thank you, Mike.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewett. I'm in with Jim Riley today. And on the air with us is Secretary of State Ruth Johnson. Ruth, welcome back.
Thank you.
I want to segue into a different area if I can. There's a little bit of confusion I'm seeing when I Google your name, Secretary, that you sent out 600 and some letters, and it looks like the media didn't like whatever you said in the letters. What's that all about?
Well, we're trying to clean up our qualified voter file. The Pew Center on the state said that Michigan had 102.8% of the qualified and eligible electorate registered to vote in 2008. You don't have to be a mathematician to know that 102.54 is just plain wrong. So we took a look at where the problems were, and we found basically 3 areas. One are people that died. So we signed a subscription with Social Security Administration and found 50,000 dead people that were still on our voter rolls. We're going one by one. We have most of those taken off now. We found 2 live people in that list, so of course we were being very careful on how we do it to make sure that we get it cleaned up. Secondly, we had about 70,000 people until the last 2 years leaving this state because of the economy here. Now we're the comeback state. We're one of the top in the nation, but there for a while things were awful tough. So people were leaving, and they were getting registered in 2 states, and by accident we found that some were voting in 2 states. So we're putting an end to that. We joined the Kansas Project, and there's over 20 states involved in that, and we cross-check our data, and we found over 100,000 people that are still registered in 2 states. So we're working with Congressman Candace Miller, who people often get me confused with because she used to be the Secretary of State, and she's going to help us have a law that said you can only be registered in 1 state. That's just basic common sense. And then third, of course, we're non-citizens. The federal government for 34 years said that we must ask everyone that comes into our office if they wanted to register to vote, which seems like a great idea, but I guess the unintended consequence was that people that were non-citizens were asked. And a lot of them didn't speak English, and so when they were asked repeatedly to sign something, they did. And our staff would be, they would be written up if they didn't ask. So they were very convincing that people should register to vote. So the people registered, and then every 10 years, we send them a new registration card because there's redistricting based on the census, and it has their name and the name where they're supposed to vote. So some people who registered, I would suspect the vast majority did it and didn't know that they weren't supposed to, and some have voted. So we have a list of over 600 people that we validated 3 times with the federal government against their records. And these are the ones that we've slowly accumulated over the last couple of years. Before that, there was no way for us to do that in our office. So we sent out those letters and said, if you have become a citizen since we got this data, that's great. Please exercise your vote to write. If you're not a citizen, you need to let us know so we can get you off the qualified voter file. You're not qualified and you don't belong on there. We've had dozens of people call us and say thank you for alerting me and telling me, and have been asked to be taken off the qualified voter file because they're not a citizen. So I think this is all just basic common sense. It's constitutional. It's fairness. Every time you have someone vote that's not supposed to, you dilute, you disenfranchise a voter of this state. And that's very important to me. That's my job as your Secretary of State, to make sure that we have voter integrity. And by getting these people off the rolls, it also helps them. Because if they vote, it's a felony. And we've had a number of them that have been prosecuted. There is a man from Kalamazoo that owned a restaurant house. His family was here. He was on a 5-year path to become a citizen, a wonderful addition to America, to Michigan, and to his neighborhood. And in Indonesia, where he's from, you must vote. It is the law. So he got the voter registration card. He checked it when he came. He didn't speak English. He got the card. He felt it was his civic duty to vote. He did. And after 5 years hard work and doing everything right, he was told he was going to be deported, because that is one of the consequences. It's a felony deportation, and or not being able to become a U.S. citizen if you commit a felony. So he got an attorney, and I think he's fought his way through to a certain point, because I know that in his case it was absolutely not on purpose. There's a woman in Berrien who just spent 10 days in jail for voting. She was not a U.S. citizen. She has kids at home. Anybody that's a mom or a dad knows the jail time wouldn't be good, but being away from your family would be horrible. We have a guy from Roseville that was bragging about it, and he's been charged when he was going across the border that he voted in America. So we do have cases of it, and we know that we're not only doing the right thing for voter integrity, but we're helping people that are trying to become U.S. citizens and doing everything right from doing something wrong because they were asked if they wanted to register to vote by our staff because it was a federal requirement.
Well, Ruth, once again, I applaud your goals here, and apparently some disagree with your methods and probably your goals also. Again, this seems to be a no-brainer, but there are groups that have, as Mike has just said, that are complaining, that are upset with what you're doing, and I know that you're trying to be kind, but while there may be the aberration of someone from Indonesia who your anecdote, who maybe made a mistake in voting, but we know that there is massive voter fraud throughout this country. I had John Fund's partner Han von Spakovsky, who they wrote, and I'm sure you're familiar with the book, a book out detailing voter fraud, not just now, but even the history in the United States, called Who's Counting?
By the way, I've had John Fund and Hans in to speak to groups before, because I think what they are telling us is very important. The integrity of elections is the foundation of our democracy, our republic, our constitution, our way of life, our justice.
Well, that's right. But the problem is that there are very large groups, very powerful groups, so certainly many of them within the Democrat Party, who are opposing their goals and your goals. I don't think that we can win this battle, and it truly is a battle, especially the way that you've been treated by some of the newspaper reports in both of these attempts, both of these endeavors with the insurance and with trying to protect my votes being counted as opposed to being crossed out by a crook, a felon. But don't we need to at least kind of point a finger at those groups, Acorn being one that's now reconstituted itself, but those groups that are actually fighting to continue these frauds throughout our state?
Well, it's never good when the media just picks out, and there are some that will. I've noticed, one little. They don't show the whole picture, and that doesn't help anybody really. And I think it's so important that the media do. They are going to be responsible. One of the things that we do, of course, that you don't hear is that we send a postcard to every 18-year-old that has a driver's license or a state ID, which is the vast majority now, just a handful that don't in this state, and it's usually for some reason. But we send out a birthday card to everybody that turns 18 that says, it's your 18th birthday, happy birthday, but please remember to register to vote. When they come in, we ask them if they'd like to register to vote, if the records show that they're not voted when they come in for a driver's license or state ID. And, there were 664,000 people that didn't have ID at one time in Michigan, and then the federal law changed and said you couldn't be on any assistance program unless you had state ID. And so what happened was those people went out and got ID. So really the people that are low income that have been on assistance, they have to have it. So that's not, a lot of times I hear the statistic over and over and see it in the paper that 664,000 people don't have ID in Michigan. Absolutely not true. It's just a handful. And some people, like my mother-in-law who has Alzheimer's and thinks Roosevelt, she doesn't have an ID, but that's good reason, right? So when I see the newspapers print that's 2007 data. That's certainly not past 2008. We register people all over with our mobile office. We've gone to all the universities to do that, 3,000 miles. Our communication team continues to work hard, and we go to the naturalization ceremonies and ask people as soon as they become citizens if they want to. I think it's really divisive not to paint the whole picture and let people make decisions from there. But that has happened. There's no doubt about it. It's not a good thing. And I think what I find most frustrating right now is that in Washington, D.C., they have all of this data. We have a snapshot of probably about a fourth of the data since we've been collecting. The other 3/4, we don't have it. And I've asked the federal government, even went to Homeland Security and met there with Janice Napolitanto's deputy with my staff, and we've written letters and Social Security Administration to Homeland Security, even to the president, and said, please help us. And I belong to the National Association Secretary of States, and on the election committee we also sent a resolution because it isn't just a Michigan problem, it's a problem all over, asking for their help. And it's really fallen on deaf ears. They don't even respond. They told me that they would respond when I went there in January, and it'll be 2 years come this January, and, I'm not holding my breath. They really haven't been helpful. And really, when you can clean up the qualified voter file, it makes it easier to look at how to make elections more convenient when they're more secure. And I think they've done a great injustice to trying to make voting more convenient, because when you have a bad QVF, it's very hard to expand.
I think you're right, Secretary, but I got to tell you, I think it doesn't go to the agendas that we share is not the same agenda that they have. And just anecdotal, let me tell you, back a few years ago, I used to fly back and forth from Vegas, a business there, and my father was sick here, so I was doing a lot of flying back and forth. And on one of those trips back, I got stuck on a layover with a group of during the layover, sitting in one of those extension restaurant / bar areas. I found myself sitting with a group of Democrat staffers that were on their way back to D.C. And at the time, in the news was on in the background at this bar restaurant, and they were talking about voter problems then. And I hadn't talked politics with them. I just happened to be sitting in the same general area. But they went off into a great explanation amongst themselves, and inevitably included me, about why we need global registration. And they were very, very serious. Their rationale was the United States impacts everybody in the world, and therefore everybody in the world should have a say in who we elect.
Wow, that's scary.
Yeah, but these folks were staffers in D.C., so we're not talking about some screwball that doesn't have a voice. We're talking about people that inevitably will push agenda. And even before the show started today, when Jim Riley and I were talking in preparation to have you on, I can't get my head around the concept that people don't think you should be a citizen or that you should have to be a citizen to vote in our electoral process. That's such a foreign thought to me. I can't understand it at all, Ruth.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember, and I come from a family where my mom was a Republican and my dad was an immigrant and a Democrat, and so we always had interesting conversations. I think you'll find the mainstream Democrats as well as the mainstream Republicans do believe in voter integrity. They do think that it should be an American that votes, and I think the polls have shown that too. But then we have operatives, and the operatives, have drank the Kool-Aid, and they'll push as hard as they can. And I think, the common sense America has to stand up to that kind of stuff, because it's not something that's just simple and easy and who cares. It's the foundation of our whole country. It is the foundation of the justice and the freedoms that we have, our republic, our way of life. And I think you see that happening now in society, and it's one of the reasons why I ran, because I really feel like we have a resurgence of people getting involved in their government. It's not a spectator sport. This is a kind of government you have to be active in if you want to have all these treasures, all these privileges that we have had and that we continue to. And people are standing in line to get in this country, despite some of our faults. It is a great country made up of it's a wonderful melting pot of people. And what we have, there's no place else on earth. And I've been to all the continents but one backpacking, and I can tell you this, I'm so fortunate, so blessed to have been born in America.
When you talk about backpacking, I had a big grin burst onto my face. We had, as a guest on the show a few weeks ago, we had Barb Vanderveen.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and she was up on Mackinac Island, and she was talking about the fact you weren't available because you were out kayaking. It was like 50 degrees and windy out. What's she doing?
Yes. Well, I bought a bunch of stickers and put them on my boat, and my kayak has a sail on it. I have expresssos.com because we've had over 4 million people use that since October 2 years ago, and it's really shortened our lines. You can go online now. You can print and go your tab. You just print the receipt. We'll get the tab to you in a week. So if you waited to your birthday, you don't have to stand in line. Stay with your family and friends. Don't come into one of our 131 offices. So I have a sale because with that on there, because I don't have a lot of money to spend on advertising, and I thought, well, that'll be kind of unusual if I'm out in the Straits, and the first time was May 31st, and then here about the third week of September. But I've got all the gear. I got the neoprene, and it is the way that it's my biggest hobby for just enjoying. I go out, although I have to admit I put my cell phone in a little plastic bag around my neck so I can do work out there too, but there's nothing quite as nice as kayaking in Michigan. It is one of the most beautiful states and places in the world, and we have 1/5 of the world's fresh water in and around Michigan. What we have here is so special, and I try to do it as often as I can, and I usually go right up into the first week of December. Actually, 2 years ago, I went out on my birthday, which my husband wanted to know what I wanted to do for my birthday. I said I want to go kayaking, and it wouldn't be unusual, but my birthday is January 8th, and the water was actually open, and that's what I did for my birthday. Just wore like you do when you go snow skiing, the stuff you need to.
Not for me, because I can't keep my boat up. I tip over like the guy on Laugh-In every time. But Secretary, we're out of time. And listen, I want to thank you very, very much for being on the show with us today. I appreciated you celebrating our first anniversary, and I look forward to having you on again.
Well, happy birthday, happy anniversary.
There you go. Thank you very, very much for what you're doing, Secretary.
Thank you.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and it's Jim Riley in with me. I'm Mike Hewett. Welcome back.
Hey, I was able to stay awake, and I'm here.
That's
still.
Not bad. That's really
No, she was.
bad.
Ruth is a real a breath of fresh air. Our Secretary of State in this state is one of the more, I would say, one of the braver, one of the more courageous elected politicians in the country. She does not shy away from addressing very, very serious problems. I think this car insurance thing is a terrible disaster that's been allowed to slide for the longest time. And of course, the state of Michigan has the in the top 5. Sometimes we're in the most expensive car insurance. Sometimes we're just 1, 2, or 3. But we are way up there. This is the honest, hardworking people who are getting ripped off by a criminal enterprise throughout this state. and good for her to promote it. What saddens me is the fact, the reality that almost an entire political party, and that would be the Democrat Party here in the state of Michigan, is fighting her on this. The same political party is fighting her on her attempts to make sure that those people who vote in elections don't cancel out those illegals, don't cancel out those of us who really care and do go out to vote. And, of course, it's not just Democrats who are fighting this. There are many, I would say, cowardly rhino Republicans out there, too. So she's almost alone. As a matter of fact, it's funny, you told me prior to this show beginning that you'd looked up some of the headlines about Ruth, and she's taking a lot of flack for this, getting rid of clearly people whose names ought to be taken off the rolls. And did you see any other elected politicians' names out there in support of her? Probably not.
I was on my way to answering the question until you added the last caveat of in support of her, because I did see where a lot of the progressive media was talking about her policy advancement being at odds and in conflict with Governor O'Snyder, which didn't surprise me a bit.
So in other words, the establishment Republican Party, and that doesn't mean every single elected Republican, but the establishment Republican Party, if they're looking over their shoulder to November 2014, is concerned that she wants to make the voting rolls accurate and make sure that illegal voting, fraudulent voting, criminal voting, that's her goal, that they want to snuff her out if they can.
Well, the article I was reading, and I think it was an MLive article, but what it was talking about was that she went against the governor, not once, not twice, but is even planning on a third time to have the words, "Are you a U.S. citizen?" And I thought, why is that a problem? Of course
you don't get how offensive that could be to someone who actually might even be a U.S. citizen. Being asked is an offensive concept to certainly those on the left. Aren't you offended by being even... Somebody might think that you're a citizen of the United States of America?
Frankly, I am as offended by the idea that somebody would think it's okay for anybody in the world to vote in our elections. I'm as offended by that, and we're talking about car insurance and throughout the show. I'm as offended by that as I am the concept of no fault, which assumes it's everybody's fault. That's why our insurance is up in the top 5. No fault is it's the assumption is that we can't find somebody at fault. There can be nobody wrong. Therefore, we're all wrong. It's the same rationale the progressives use when you look at gun violence. You have 1% of the society that are a bunch of nitwits, and so they want to strip the rights of 99% of the rest of the people. I go, what? We're all guilty of what these morons did?
Well, we do have one brave elected official in this state, and I'm sure there are more, but certainly Ruth Johnson is one of those. And I didn't get to the point where I was able to ask, what should we do? But I will tell you this, that if you do care about having some progress, seeing some progress in changing the insurance rules, making sure that only registered legal voters vote so that your vote isn't canceled out, pick up the phone and call your elected rep. And if you're listening to us here on locally here in West Michigan, that would be our state representatives, the 2 Democrats, which would be Colleen Lamati and Marcia Hovey-Wright, and our state senator would be Republican Jeff Hansen. They need phone calls, and it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to call the governor's office and let them know that you stand for the principles and the issues that this brave woman has brought forward and is essentially getting only flack from the media and from certainly from the Democrat Party and in many cases, as you just pointed out, from the Republican leadership too.
Well, I think if you're a Republican legislator, it's very, very difficult to go against what your Republican governor is putting forward, and so in this case, while certainly there are some extraordinarily moderate Republicans, the reality of it is that O'Snyder is not on board with this, and he has some pressure that he applies to folks. But listen, on a different note, what I wanted to kind of finish up talking about is I'm still working on this Liberty Surge. Now, you remember that conversation?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
From last week, which anybody can go on to your Facebook site and see the link. I believe you posted it online.
There's an actual Facebook page that says that's titled Liberty's Surge. that folks can find, and it's in its infancy. I'm just still working on doing a relaunch of my book, America's Final Beginning, with the idea of using whatever monies that generates to help fund the legal side of setting up a nonprofit corporation for Liberty Surge and beginning the process of a 503C. But part of this goes to the debate over, is it the elected officials that are the problem, or is it the electorate that doesn't understand? And so I said it will be the people and not their leaders that save America, and I genuinely believe that. But with that being said, if we want different representation, we must first win over the electorate, and in other words, replacing one leader that doesn't understand with another leader that doesn't understand isn't really, to me, it's not very logical. And so I say to myself, we've got evidence now that the government is not willing to help educate the electorate. Maybe it's not their role to do that anyway, but that leaves it up to us. We, the people that do understand, that want a limited constitutional government, can't just say it's us against them. We've got to reach out and start working to educate some folks that have no concept what the word liberty means.
Well, I agree. I certainly, people who are listening to this show are well above the curve in terms of their interest and the efforts that they've made to educate themselves as to what the issues are. And certainly you can disagree with us and be on the other side if in fact you are educated, as opposed to just taking whatever the union boss or whatever MSNBC had spouted out in the morning. And the same way from the conservative side of the media also, which would be mostly talk radio. But I am very concerned that we continue to elect politicians, leaders, people who should be leading. It's one thing for the people to stand tall, but the people do not have the power, they don't have the responsibility, they don't even have access to much of the information. We need to elect leaders who will in fact stand tall, and we need to de-elect those leaders who have proven that they will not stand tall, that they run to the tall grass whenever a tough question comes about. And be they Republicans or Democrats, I think the real problem that human beings have, and this goes back certainly to the days in Europe prior to World War I, certainly prior to World War II, where people sat back and allowed the loudest, most ugly voices to triumph. And we're seeing that happening far too often here in this country. And just sitting back and letting those leaders, in fact, take over the conversation. We cannot have leaders who will do the Winston Churchill-type leadership today if we continue to elect the kind of leaders that we've been electing here in this state and nationally. And that's another issue we'll get to. But
Jim, we've got 2 or 3 generations where a fair swath, a fairly measurable percentage of those groups of population that have no idea what the taste of victory is. They have no idea the feeling of being able to complete a task and look back and enjoy the feeling of success, frankly. And
yes.
And so when they don't have those feelings, when we've robbed them of the mother of necessity that causes people to get up every morning and go to work, we can't expect those people to vote with the same type of thought process that a person who has worked and earned and moved, they're going to vote differently. And that's what we're seeing. And people like President Obama have done a really great job at widening that spread of people, the sheer raw numbers of people that really don't know the concept of liberty.
Well, there's a way to fix that, and your way, I think, is one very, very honorable and valid path. But there's another way also, and there was a meeting just held this week to discuss in Muskegon Common Core. And Common Core, of course, is essentially the federalizing, the Obamacare-izing of the curriculums in our schools throughout the country that certainly could definitely politicize it, and it certainly could continue on this sheep mentality. And the interesting thing is that out of Kalamazoo, a very bright woman with a math degree, a mathematics degree from the University of Michigan, came. There was the church was almost full, and the superintendent, the very, very well-paid superintendent from Muskegon Intermediate School District, was supposed to be on the other side of the conversation, making a presentation, a half-hour presentation on the benefits of Common Core, and then they had an hour set aside to accept questions. At the last minute, on the day of that event, Superintendent Dave Sipka just chose not to show up. He didn't bother sending anyone else. There many interested citizens in our county showed up. They were stuffed. They were just stiffed, not stuffed. They were stiffed by the government, who tells us it's a wonderful program, but in fact does not have the guts to actually tell us to our faces.
See, here's the problem. When those type of things happen, the media's job is to step up and say this fella or this person didn't bother to show up.
Yep.
And the fact that the media doesn't do that, to me, that's alarming.
It is alarming. It's pretty sickening because the M Live made frankly a very nice attempt and succeeded at to promoting it. I believe it was in the newspaper. It was certainly well publicized in the newspaper. They made not a peep about the fact that the very, very well-paid, well-compensated Dave Sipka did not show up.
Tell me this now. You attended the meeting.
Yes, I did. I videoed it.
Are you pro or against? Where are you on Common Core?
Well, since I only heard the negative side, my view is that it's exactly the wrong thing to do. But to me, it's more important that the people who are for it are not willing to stand in front of people and answer questions, and that tells me an awful lot.
See, I sat down with my state representative, Amanda Price, down in the 89th District, or the north part of Ottawa County, and she's very much in favor of it. I am opposed to it because everything I've seen tells me that it's another wall between students and their mothers and their fathers. It's a pushback of parents, whereas I think that this country needs more parenting, not less. So that's my concern.
It's even worse than that, though. We ought to have a show on that because the features of this seemingly innocuous program are amazing.
We had Melanie Curtis on back in May, and we discussed it. But let's do it again.
Melanie was the speaker who was here earlier this week.
Very nice. Listeners, thank you for listening to our first anniversary show. And Jim, thank you. I appreciate your help.
I loved every minute of it.
Oscar, thank you.
We saw, and one person that was cheating, they mistakenly used our own branch office fax number on their forged policy. We've seen advertised fake insurance on Craigslist. That guy's in a lot of trouble if he's convicted. He's been charged with a number of felonies. And nearly 30 people turned in fake insurance with an official-looking QR code on it that you use with a smartphone. And when you scanned it, it took you to a document that reads, "Llamas are so cool." But I'll tell you, fraud certainly is not. Yeah, we've even they've gotten so sophisticated, these people that sell bogus insurance, to some unsuspecting people, and some I would think probably know, but they have fake help desks that verify the phony insurance when our clerks call. We even have a former insurance agent that's using old forms, and again, they're tricking people. So we knew we need to do something, and we need to do it fast, because the cost to the honest people in this state is staggering, just staggering. We have a fund that we all pay into for uninsured and catastrophic funds, and it's a statewide fund to settle claims from accidents where someone does not have insurance. And the cost to us now annually is $220 million that's tacked onto all of our insurance. And that fund grew 47% between 2007 and 2011, just over 4 years, just because of the sheer number of claims stemming from these accidents.
Welcome. You're listening to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewett, in with Jim Riley.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jim. And listen, today is our the first anniversary of the Renegade River Show, and we're delighted to have our guest, Secretary of State Ruth Johnson, on the line with us. Welcome, Secretary.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be on your 1-year anniversary, to be on your show.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about it. I got to tell you, it's been a real learning curve for me over the last year, and we've certainly had some high points and some low points, but with you on as our guest today, that's going to be one of the high points.
Well, thank you. I always look forward to making sure that we can get information out to people, and that way, when they make decisions, especially when they go to the polls, that they can vote for who they really think is going to do the job. And I thank you for getting out information about issues to the people so that they can make good decisions.
You know, mostly we have a lot of fun doing that. Tell me, if I could get your Secretary, tell us a little bit about the FAIR program that you're working on.
Well, FAIR, our FAIR initiative, FAIR stands for Fighting Auto Insurance Ripoffs. And what we're trying to stop is fraud, and we've put together a task force to look at all the things that we can do. Some of them will probably be new laws, some of them will be how we do things internally, and some of them will be how we communicate with all the different branches of law enforcement. We knew it was a problem, some of the scams that are going on. There was an auto dealership that we closed down that was selling cars, used cars to people, and so if they quit paying on their insurance. So we're looking at ways that we'd have an electronic verification that would come in very often. We've already cut the time in half. We're looking at what we can do that's realistic with a computer system that we could get that information to law enforcement. And just by doing what we've done so far, we have increased the number that we have invalidated that are out on the road 10 times. We've gone from 431 that we suspended the vehicle registrations in 2011. So far this year, we're up over 4,300. So we're up 10 times higher than we've been. So we're taking a very active stance against people that are driving without insurance, because the rest of us are paying for that, and that cost at $220 million that we all have to pay to try to cover the people that are not insured through our insurance, which raises premiums, of course. That doesn't even begin to count or put into perspective the cost, because if you're driving a car and you get in an accident, under Michigan law, if the other person has 4 people in the car, you don't have to cover the driver, but your insurance has to cover everything with the people that are riding in the car with them. So those costs, of course, those medical costs are very high. So we're all paying those. We don't know the number on that, but we know that it's substantial. So the cost to Michiganians with incidents involving uninsured motorists.
Ruth, I've got a question on this. It sounds like what you've explained so far has been the situations where the person who was presenting the proof of insurance that was fraudulent was in many cases a victim, although some cases a willing participant in the fraud. But I have seen, even here in Muskegon County, and I'm sure you, in your driving around, you may have seen somewhat similar, but there have been these storefront auto insurance companies that have been set up. I know there was the one here in Muskegon County was called LA Insurance, I believe. And they had car insurance pay by the week. And pretty clearly, paying by the week is going to be effective for some folks who don't have a lot of money, going to pay a small amount. But it certainly opened the door for someone to get a policy, pay the small amount down, and then cancel it, get the valid insurance form, the proof of insurance, and then cancel it shortly thereafter. Is your plan? I know you can't do everything at the same time, but will your endeavors be going after this truly, clearly fraudulent activity?
Well, it's legal to sell it by the week. We certainly have had discussions, and we've had one task force meeting about should we have insurance that you can only buy by the week, considering the number of people then that never pay past that. And by the way, they pay dearly for that week. But none of that money goes into the uninsured or catastrophic claims.
Correct.
So none of those people are paying them insurance, and the insurance was all bogus. It was fraudulent. And, of course, the only time you really find out is when you get in a accident and then there's a claim, and so people were being taken advantage of. We closed that one down. We found people out in our parking lot with a laptop and a printer printing off fraudulent insurance. People were buying it. Some of them, probably most of them, knew it was fraudulent. Some of them, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. And you have to really guard yourself and be careful. But because we saw the fraud, we started electronic monitoring with the insurance companies, and we have an electronic verification system. And what we saw with that system was, it was really astounding, the amount of invalid and fraudulent insurance that people are driving without in Michigan. And again, some of them are taken advantage of, and some of them participate knowing that it's fraud. So we decided to do a one-day snapshot across this state, and we have 131 branches, and of course a couple of them in the UP are open just a day or two a week. So it was 128. 3 of them were closed that day. We did a snapshot of all the paper insurance that people brought in, not the electronic ones, but the paper ones. And it was a bit startling to see what the numbers were out there. Actually, 16.1% were fraudulent. Out of 3,400 paper certificates, that's 552 invalid or fraudulent. We saw whiteout.